Before we start today, I want to acknowledge with respect the Indigenous peoples and communities whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day and on whose traditional territories our work takes place. My name is Autumn Sipis. I am the project manager with the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. And on behalf of the coalition, I would like to welcome you to today's training event, 7 Steps to Lower Carbon at Your Healthcare Facility. Event is part of the coalition's Preparing Canada's Healthcare Buildings for Net Zero project, made possible with investment from the Government of Canada's Low Carbon Economy Implementation Readiness Fund. Throughout the event, please use the chat function for any technical issues you may be experiencing and use the Q&A function for any questions you have regarding the presentation. Our panelist, Stephen, will be answering questions at the end of the event today. We will also be recording this presentation, which will be sent out to all registrants and will be available on our website and YouTube channel at a later time. So, here with us today is Stephen Dixon, the principal of TDS Dixon Inc. He has for over 44 years provided energy management services to a diverse range of industrial, commercial, institutional, and utility organizations. Broadly recognized as a leader in energy management training, his focus is simple: to empower all that he works with to use energy more effectively by developing individual skills, organizational best practices, and providing tools for energy management. Take things away, Stephen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Autumn. Well, it's and I will move pretty quickly because it's going to be a quick session today, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. We will be providing the slides afterwards. There's going to be content on the slides that I won't read, but you can go back and read later to remind yourself, maybe alongside the recording. Our agenda, we'll start at the big picture. We'll dive down into the central topic, which is the 7 steps. It turns out that we developed the 7 steps many years ago as an energy management methodology, but it turns out that it makes a whole lot of sense within this decarbonizing world that we're in now. And so I'll present it from that point of view. And then towards the end, I'll take a few minutes and just show you some applications of the 7 steps in terms of treasure hunt audits and retrofits as well. So the methodology is certainly not inconsistent with other approaches, and I'll demonstrate that as we finish off. So from the big picture point of view, I always like to start with the fact that energy management and carbon management is not just a technical function. There's no doubt that we have to do things different operationally and technologically. We have to involve people. I know many healthcare organizations are actually doing this quite actively, the engagement, the behavior change piece, that type of thing. But then the organizational piece, like for example, in New Brunswick, where hospitals are utilizing energy management systems like ISO 50001, really, we've got to hit all 3 of these circles to be successful. There's a fiscal result and then there's a carbon result, right? And that's why that's a black dollar sign, not a green one, in the sense that we're going to reduce carbon and reduce cost. Ultimately, the other thing we have to keep in mind in all of this, and I always tell people this, it's not about, and I'm going to say it kind of maybe crudely, but freeze in the dark and suffocate and be scared and unproductive and unreliable. No, back when I started off in energy management 44 years ago, when I approached a building, people would run the other direction because they thought I was going to deny them what they need from energy. Absolutely not. In fact, today, what we can find, especially with things like recommissioning or existing building commissioning, we can actually improve the comfort, the safety, the productivity in the space. We can make a better space. We can improve the reliability of equipment. We can get that energy savings, maybe some indirect savings, and ultimately that carbon reduction as well. So it's about having your cake and eat it too, if I can put it that way, right? So never compromise. Make sure whatever you do checks the boxes positively for all of these things. And the human side of this cannot be underestimated. I use this slide many, many times. Organization in the UK, which tried to in 4 buildings reduce energy. In the first 2 of their buildings labeled technology, they applied building automation systems. And in fact, what they discovered was that they drove consumption up in one, mild savings in the other. Then they turned their attention to people, 16% in the 3rd building. And when people and technology work together, that's where they had the most significant reduction. And I've seen this played out over and over and over again. So never lose sight of the importance and the value and the contribution that people can make. This isn't just a technological world. We are human beings and we play a big role in that. So from the point of view of where's the carbon, why are we talking about energy today? Because there's many other things you'll talk about when it comes to emission reduction, carbon reductions, right, and the impact on the atmosphere. But energy definitely is a strong one, right? All that natural gas or number 2 oil or propane that you use contributes directly to carbon, right? And then obviously the electricity used, depending on how it's being generated, where you are in the country, anywhere from 0.01 kilograms to zero point 0.99 kilograms of CO2 for every kilowatt hour consumed. So there's direct on the right or on the left, and sorry, direct on the right, indirect, let me get indirect on the right, direct on the left. So one way or the other, those are the emission reductions. If we can save energy, we can reduce energy, we can reduce cost, and we can reduce our carbon. So the 7 steps is a methodological way to approach it, to look at energy, look at carbon together. Very simply stated, step 1, understand cost, energy, and carbon. Understand the relationship between those two things. Understand what you're paying, the price, and I'll explain why in a second. Compare yourself. Benchmarking. Most of you probably do that in some form or fashion. Compare yourself to others, compare yourself to yourself. I call that monitoring or performance analysis. Understand when your building uses energy, your facility, whether it be monthly, and we can learn a lot from that in terms of what we have to do to decarbonize, but also understand minute by minute almost, we can find lots of opportunities in facilities. It tells us exactly what's going on in that building. And understand where all the energy is going, breaking it down. Audits do a good job of doing this if they're done properly. And the key steps when it comes to actually delivering results here, get rid of waste, step 5. Improve efficiency, how well we convert the energy from the purchase form, which is where we start actually, to the end use form where we need it, and then make sure that we're optimizing the supply side of things. But that last 3 steps, that order is critical. You can maybe play with the order in the first 4 steps, but I'm going to tell you that we really need to focus on, we do not want to use more energy than we have to. That's waste, right? Then we want to improve efficiency. The financial result depends on us getting this in the right order. And that's entirely consistent with other approaches as well, which I'll present by the time we get to the end. Try this slide here. Try to create this slide for yourself. Understand, how your cost breaks down, how your energy breaks down, how your greenhouse gas emissions, your carbon breaks down. Right? Understand the relationship between the two. The first thing you see here, and this would be, say, for the province of Ontario in a healthcare facility, that we see a bulk of our cost comes from electricity, but a huge bulk of our carbon comes from the natural gas. That then presents us with a challenge when it comes to going to lower carbon. Does that mean we have to increase cost? No, we have to look at the interaction between these two. That's going to take a different form in every province and every jurisdiction, depending on how the electricity is generated, what fuels that you're actually using. It's a good graph to start with, and it really forms a basis for looking at this whole idea of reducing carbon. Getting right down to electricity bills, understanding how you pay for the electricity is critical, because if you don't understand it, you may do something in reducing carbon that will increase your costs unnecessarily. So understanding how your electricity bill works and understanding what the marginal prices are, because at the end of the day, right, this marginal price, right, which is actually the right price to apply to energy savings measures, what's on the margin, but it also may impact your electrification strategy, meaning reducing the use of fossil fuels, using more electricity, understanding the demand impact, always so important, right? So making sure we understand how we pay for electricity so that when we look for that strategy to reduce natural gas or oil and shift to electricity, we're not doing it at adverse financial impact. We're taking advantage of maybe some of the things. Like, for example, here in Ontario, the Class A, right, which is how you actually have a big opportunity if you're a Class A consumer who are paying for most of the energy on the 5 top peaks that you contribute to the province. So that's a big opportunity, understanding the bill, how it interacts with whatever strategy you come up with. Benchmarking. I mean, I'm sure you all are familiar with Portfolio Manager, right? Understanding how your facility performs, if you've got a number of facilities, how they perform one to the other, and not just looking at it from the point of view of the gigajoules per square meter, but also looking at it with respect to weather, but also with respect to the number of beds or the amount of service you provide for the facility. That's a really good place to start. And most of you are probably using Portfolio Manager or similar tools to do that. Now, what I like to suggest is that, a lot of people say, well, my facility isn't really comparable, but benchmarking leads to a conversation we can have, even just comparing it to similar facilities or maybe even different facilities of people having that conversation, really understanding the differences between performance and what that means in terms of the difference in practice. We can learn things from exploring those differences, the diversity. The other thing I like to do is compare a facility to itself over time. Baseline at some point in the future, look at it going forward. This is a great example from a healthcare facility where a friend of mine who does similar work to me, he called me up, he said, Steve, this hospital isn't looking at their gas consumption monthly. What can they do to demonstrate, the value of doing that? I said, run a regression, run a Q-sum. Regression is statistical analysis. Q-sum is this curve I'm showing you. If the Q-sum is horizontal, it means that building is performing as it normally, right? It's just not changing. If the Q-sum turns upwards, it means it's getting worse. If it turns downwards, it means better. In this case, they ran it on the hospital. They generated this curve. My friend asked the physical plant guy for the hospital. He said, "What happened there? Right at the end of at the end of 2000, the first downturn." Well, the answer is on the graph here for you, but that answer wasn't immediately forthcoming. They had to dig and find out what they did. They actually installed an economizer. Then the person from the hospital said, "Well, what happened when that went horizontal there? In 2001, 2002?" Well, what happened? Well, when it went horizontal, it means you lost the savings from the economizer. It turns out they serviced the economizer at the bottom there before that plateau started. And when they serviced it, when they put it back into service, they didn't set the valves properly to allow the water to flow through it. So they weren't actually recovering heat from it until later on. And this took a few weeks for the folks from the hospital to figure out. An operator said, "Yeah, I actually found that a few months later." Turns out that was like, I don't know, $60,000 worth of missed opportunity. Look at your data. Let it speak to you. Let it tell you a story. Very, very important. And the tools are out there. RetScreen, we'll have a session on RetScreen coming up. We'll have one on Portfolio Manager. We'll definitely have one on RetScreen. Great tools for doing that kind of analysis. Going back into 1982, the first time I ever looked at a hospital and how it used electricity. I looked at the data from the hospital on a 15-minute basis. It taught me things about that hospital. The data's out there, use it. You may have sub-meters within your hospital. Use them too. RetScreen, if you don't have other tools to look at that data fluidly, RetScreen has tools to do that. We'll feature that in another one of these webinars coming up. Understand, it's like the electrical heartbeat. You've got doctors in your healthcare facilities that use EKGs, ECGs to look at the function of the human body. Well, this is kind of like the EKG for your facility. The electrical use tells you a lot about what's happening in that facility, and you can find opportunities from that, right? Even looking at the monthly data, understanding what your base load is. A lot of people think that the weather contributes to a large percentage, that is a lot of their consumption is weather dependent. Well, in a hospital, it may turn out that maybe your weather dependent consumption is only 35%. That's going to have a direct impact on how you electrify, what you're going to do to find the opportunities to reduce that gas energy reduction, because it's not dependent on weather, it's dependent on something else. And maybe there's heat recovery opportunities in there as well. So understanding exactly how your facility uses energy, either on a monthly basis or what we call interval data, going down to a 15-minute on an hourly basis, taking a look at it, really charting out what it's doing. This is kind of like, this is almost a year in the life of this is actually, I think, a long-term care facility we were working on. Same thing for gas. That data is available for many facilities now, hourly. If you have to electrify that facility, this curve is really, really valuable because it tells you how big that heating system has to be, right? Because if you assume that your boilers are how big it has to be, in the future, maybe it's not that. Maybe you've made changes. So understanding what your real heating load is going to be really important. And these types of graphs are really useful. Going beyond that, digging right down, looking every 15 minutes, finding that there was a chiller that was cycling unnecessarily. You can see this is a week in the life of a building. You can see the temperature is the dotted line, and you can see this chiller cycling at night. And then you can see, in fact, that was one problem they had, was that the controls on the chiller weren't working. The second one was temperature control. What happened was the building temperatures in an office area of the building were set back during towards the end of the afternoon, and the electric heat kicked in to raise the temperature to the set back temperatures. That was a controls issue. One profile, 15 minutes of analysis, huge opportunities in terms of the cost of operation of that building. Understanding where the energy goes, right? Do you know where all the energy goes in your building? It's worth doing this. Any structured approach, any formal approach to energy management from a systems perspective dictates you need to do this. You got to know where it's going. We can't just go randomly out there and find opportunities. We need to focus on the bigger users. We need to understand that maybe cooling isn't as big as we thought it was. That's one thing that always surprises people, how much we don't actually put into cooling. So that could become very informative in terms of prioritizing what your next steps are going to be, for sure. RetScreen does a good job of this. We'll talk about this. If you've never used RetScreen before, actually, I think, Autumn, we can probably send out a RetScreen key after this workshop. If you've never used it, we can send out, I think we can get access to a 15-day key or a 2-week key. You can play with RetScreen a little bit. You can download it today and use it. But then if you want to save things with it, then you're going to need the key to get to the professional version. But it has archetypes. This is an archetype for a facility. We can go in and look at, this is the nursing and residential home. right? And we can look at an archetype. It's a very typical building that's being built to demonstrate what opportunities exist within the building. Everything from conventional building envelope improvements, boiler improvements, all the way through to lighting, hot water systems, motors, fans, pumps, and in fact, even applying a solar water heater, a solar air heater potentially, or even a photovoltaic system to the building. A to Z on what can be done. RedScreen is a great tool for exploring your opportunities. Again, we'll feature that in a later webinar. So that's step 4. We started off by understanding, our costs, our consumption, our carbon, how we compare, right? When we use the energy, where we use it. Now we got to go looking for savings. Now we have to go looking for savings. All right. RedScreen, it has some great tools for being able to do this, as I said before. If you open up RedScreen and you want to just explore a building, which might be, you could be an acute care facility, you could be a long-term care facility, you can click into what's called the virtual energy analyzer, and you can take a look at a building from A to Z, including the financial case for reducing carbon. They have 2 kinds of archetypes in there. That definition of an archetype is something that's very typical. So the 2 types of archetypes, one is an energy reduction archetype, 40% energy reduction. The other one is a deep carbon, 80 to 90% reduction in carbon. They're based on the same initial building, but they have different strategies played out to get to those lower energy or very low carbon. Have a look at those. It's almost like kind of like a game in a sense, meaning you can look at it but you get to play with it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to play with your own building. So then you can apply those ideas later. And in fact, you get some pretty nice views. So here, this is an example of the low emission archetype reducing emissions by 90% and 59 tons of CO2. And it doesn't matter where you are in the country. This will work. You simply set your location and the archetype adjusts to your circumstance. In fact, the low carbon archetypes are very intelligent. They, in fact, adjust to your situation and they play out a number of scenarios in deciding which one they're going to present you with in terms of the application of renewables, electrification, those types of things. So they're not just templates. That's the key thing. And if anybody, I have my email up afterwards. If anybody wants a quick tour, I want to get into this, but I wonder how Stephen would approach it. I'd be happy to spend a few minutes with you online to do that. I always make that offer. I know there's a large group out here, but at the same time, if that causes you to take some positive steps forward, that's what my mission is all about. All right, steps 5, 6, and 7, identify the opportunity, waste, efficiency, and supply. All right, eliminate waste. Energy we don't need to use. It's very simple, actually, but maybe not as simple to get to. But the key thing here is to always understand what we need, because sometimes, maybe people that are really committed to reducing waste, but maybe don't think about it carefully, they may do things that will compromise what the need is. So when we start an existing building commission, we always start with the current facility requirement. What do we need? Where we define what's needed in terms of heating, cooling, lighting, fluid, all those kinds of things, right? So we define what the need is so that we don't inadvertently end up compromising that need by reducing waste incorrectly. And there is a document called the CFR. Later on, after this one, we'll have Michel Perron, who'll be delivering this in French. And Michel does a lot of work. He's an amazing practitioner of existing building commissioning. His email is at the end of the slide deck, too. And he uses a document like this to define what the requirements are across a building, different parts of the building, and for different requirements, right? That way, it's established upfront. And it's not debatable at that point, right? We can't, it's like the hard deck. We can't go below that, right? We have to meet that requirement, but anything above that requirement then becomes waste. And I don't mean to insult anybody's intelligence. I think you can all think about the dimensions of waste. I like to think about 3 types of actions: turning things off, turning things down, and controlling it. Yeah, so we all know about the phantom loads and, the leaky building envelope, but these are things that really are foundational in terms of getting to low carbon. There's no way we're going to get to low carbon if we have a lot of waste in our buildings. So we have to address this stuff first. And in fact, this stuff can impact the economics of actually doing efficiency improvement. So the order here isn't just technical, it's also financial, but it's commonsensical as well. But is that the right word? It's common sense. So turning it off, turning things down if we can't turn them off, application of various different types of devices, and then controlling things. Michel, who does a lot of work, I know he's lurking out there online, but does a lot of work in existing building commissioning. And one of the things we find through and through in existing building commissioning, we find opportunities for scheduling things, having things only run when they're needed. So existing building commissioning is a very methodical approach to, amongst other things, getting to measures that simply reduce waste. It's not about replacing equipment. It's about taking the equipment we have and making it better. It's systematic, right? It's a logical step-by-step methodology, and it involves the folks in the building as well. So a really good foundational piece, existing building commissioning, to go after that simple thing that I refer to as waste. Some examples: pumps running in parallel when they didn't need to. They were during a commissioning exercise, one pump was put on a deep override and sat there and ran for many, many years. So as a result of some work we did a treasure hunt in this building. I'll explain what a treasure hunt is later. $3,000 a year and 9 tons of carbon just by turning off something that didn't need to be on, and actually equalizing the wear and tear in the pumps, because it turned out one pump was running all the time at higher flow than another one. So this was a way to actually improve the reliability of the system as well. Daylight sensors that are improperly located, right? We got the technology, but because it's over dark floors and too far away from the windows, it can't do its job to turn off the lights or to modulate the lighting output. By relocating them, 1 ton of carbon per sensor and $400 of cost reduction. So simple things, again, identified through maybe a structured approach to waste reduction, recommissioning, or existing building commission. And I can't say enough about these things. Every time I show a screen, right, like this, which is a building automation screen, and I'm sure many of you out there have seen these things, right? But ultimately, they find opportunities, and the big one is always things that are being overridden. Why are they being overridden? And I'm sure that beyond the overrides here, if some of you were to spend enough time looking at the screen, you could probably find some other opportunities as well beyond the overrides, right? So the building automation system, as my friend Michelle says, is probably the biggest liar in the room, but it may be the biggest opportunity too. Or it's supposed to save energy, but sometimes it's not. And if we can get to those opportunities through it, that's certainly a good channel. Optimizing outside air on economizers, right? Making sure that we're not we're ventilating in an appropriate way, right? So that can hit both electricity and natural gas as well. One thing I like to do when I'm looking for waste is I like to have these operational energy checklists, and I like to involve people in this. So later on, I'll talk about the energy treasure hunt as an example of how to use the 7 steps. And we use these checklists all the time, right? Just cues things in people's minds. Okay, and what we're trying to do is work with the folks in the building, because they understand the building and the systems more than we do as the energy people coming in, and bringing that knowledge together, through these types of activities and with the kind of checklists, we can find a lot of good opportunity. I'll show you that in a long-term care home coming up. All right, step 6. After we get rid of waste, then we want to go after efficiency. So this is how well we convert the energy from the purchase form to the end use form. We want to look at things like maintenance and maybe combustion control. When it comes to carbon, making sure that we're optimizing those combustion systems. Eventually, we'll want to get rid of them, but to begin with, we at least want to improve them. It's funny. My father, who's 93 years old this year, bought a hybrid vehicle a few years ago, and he said, "Steve, I think the world has missed the boat on hybrid vehicles." He said, everybody wants to get to full electric, which is kind of like getting to zero carbon, right, in the facilities world. But sometimes having hybrid systems, right, which optimize the combustion systems and then combine it with an electric system, can actually make a huge dent. So one thing I want you to think about going forward in these 7 steps: don't try to get to net zero tomorrow. Don't try to get to zero carbon, but plot a path that takes you downwards, that makes sense, right? And it's practical and probably even financially viable as well. So making sure that we're not trying to go too far too fast. And later on, I'll mention again, hybrid systems make a lot of sense in that context. Certainly optimizing, your compressors, your pumps, your fans, making sure we're using things from an operational perspective. So there's operational efficiency, and then there's technological efficiency, where we replace equipment to get more efficiency. So the first 3 things on here is really about operational efficiency. The last one is about technological. So again, operational efficiency costs less, right? So there's a financial approach here, which begins with those things that are lower cost and no cost and moves up. Now, low cost, no cost doesn't mean no brainer. We got to think about this stuff. We got to involve people, but we can build a foundation, right? House in order before we start to make those more significant changes. My own house, right? What's the difference between a dirty filter and a clean filter? I have an ECM motor, which is basically a variable speed drive for my fan and my furnace. And my furnace fan has the ability to speed up when the filter gets dirty. Clean filter, 111 watts. Dirty filter, 353 watts. That's a huge difference, right? If I had waited 2 weeks to change that filter, wouldn't it be a good idea because it would have cost me $8 more in electricity. That'll pay for that filter. So, even something as simple as filters and understanding the impact of them on a constant speed versus a variable speed system, very important when it comes to certainly saving money and potentially carbon as well. Pipe insulation, right? Making sure we've got I've just picked a few different ideas here. This is all part of an efficient distribution system, making sure that we're not basically releasing heat unnecessarily, right? And that can have a huge impact on carbon. Triple duty valves on pumps, right? Here's a simple valve that's designed to modulate the flow from a pump, right? And also to provide backflow prevention and so on. Well, oftentimes they're used to permanently reduce the flow from a pump. This was a system where a variable speed drive actually existed, right? And it was running full speed, and somebody used the valve to turn it down. So Michelle and I, whenever we walk into a mechanical room, we always go looking for those triple duty valves to understand whether there's an opportunity to actually release that valve and use the drive somewhere else, right? Can contribute directly to carbon reduction and cost reduction as well. The other thing I want you to think about as you go through this, a lot of people say, well, the building envelope is so important or so expensive to retrofit. Yes, it is, but there are probably some simple things we can do in terms of the building envelope. So don't neglect the building envelope. It's the first and the last line of defense in a sense. It's the thing that contains the heat. We always look at the active systems, but let's not lose sight of the passive systems, i.e. the building envelope in this process. And there may be some very practical things we can do. We're not going to dramatically change the consumption of the building, but it all contributes. It all contributes to that solid foundation that we don't have to electrify or decarbonize later on, right? Lighting upgrades, right? Lighting upgrades, almost pretty boring today, I can say it that way, but everybody's done lighting retrofit, right? But one of the things that lighting retrofits actually present, even today, they enable, right, greenhouse gas emission reductions in other ways by freeing up electrical capacity that can be used to then, say, displace fossil fuels as well. So a lot of the electricity things you're going to do is going to save you dollars, but it's going to free up capacity to be used for providing heat and then displacing fossil fuels in other ways. So that there's synergy between those two things. So don't forget the lighting upgrades. So I bring these last 3-step or 2 steps together in terms of waste and efficiency, and I want you to think about 4 boxes. When I go looking for opportunities in any building, I think about what can I do manually to turn things off. That gets rid of waste at a relatively low cost. Or maybe I need to do that automatically, improve the amount of automatic control. And certainly, motion sensors and vacancy detectors and all those good, there's some good technologies out there, as long as it's used right. Like, remember that dimming system for the lights in the windows? We have to use it right, but it works if it's set up and designed properly. So automatic control costs more. It's all about getting rid of waste. Then looking at efficiency. The filter in my furnace, that's an operating condition, but that also reduced the efficiency of that device quite dramatically. I had a very efficient fan, right, and motor driving it, but I destroyed its efficiency by neglecting. I didn't neglect it. Somebody who was living in my house at the time neglected it. But nevertheless, that filter destroyed the efficiency of that system. That's an operating condition. Eventually, I want to look at more efficient equipment. I want to invest in that technology. But the one thing I'm going to suggest is that the reason the numbers are here is before you think about things in box 4, think about things in box 1, 2, and 3, because they all create the context for what you do in box 4. And it could be not using that equipment as much is going to impact the business case for replacing with more efficient equipment, right? So these things do interact. Energy is a very, I guess, how would you call it, integrated type of approach. It crosses many boundaries and systems, and we want to make sure that we understand those relationships and take advantage of them and not get caught by them. All right, back to the 7th and final step, which is going to bring us to the supply side of things. But before we move into the supply side, right, we always want to manage the end use, and that's what waste and efficiency is all about. It's all about managing the end use, right? Optimizing the operation. Maybe it's about reducing peak demand. Now, demand doesn't save energy, but it does free up capacity in your systems to be used by electricity to offset maybe other greenhouse gas emissions like combustion equipment and things like that. And don't forget about the base load, right? There's a lot of waste typically in that base load. So again, using those profiles to really manage that curve, right? We want to make sure we reduce the night loads. We want to reduce those peak loads, right? And we can monitor that actually with those curves as well. So, really, before we get to supply, we need to ask ourselves, have we done everything we can to manage that that electrical curve as well, because that's going to free up capacity. It's going to free up money to do things, right? The capacity comes at the peak, and the money comes from the electricity that's not wasted at night as well. All right, so optimizing supply. Some pretty basic things that go into this category, things that we've all heard about. Heat recovery is a big one within any kind of healthcare facility. Heat recovery, you've got lots of uses of heat, right? And so basically, make sure that we're taking advantage of all of those opportunities for heat recovery. That's kind of, to me, that's the next foundational piece, right? After we get rid of the waste and we maximize that efficiency, the next foundational piece is to make sure then that we've taken advantage of all opportunities for heat recovery. There's no use in buying new energy or putting in a renewable energy system or even a heat pump for that matter. But heat pumps can actually be used for heat recovery as well. But basically, we got to get the order right here. Let's take stock of all that we have available and then eventually turn our attention to those renewables, right, that are out there, freely available. Well, not necessarily freely. I once did a webinar within faith communities it was a seminar on energy reduction in faith communities and getting to low carbon. And people were walking in the door with this ill-conceived notion that solar energy is free. Well, it may be free until it hits your solar panels, but you had to pay for the solar panels. And it turns out that, I look out my back house here and I have a number of neighbors that have photovoltaic panels on the roof of their homes. And, it's interesting. I just hope that for each one of those, when I walk into their homes, they don't have wasted electricity, because it doesn't make any sense, right, to put solar panels on, which you can then sell back to the utility with too, depending on the type of metering you have, net metering. But it doesn't make sense to have waste in your home and solar panels. Those two things are just completely contradictory. But get the waste out, get the efficiency up, and then look at the renewable piece. And that is the path to low carbon at the end of the day as well. Some examples coming from hospitals in this category. This is up in, I think in Flin Flon, right? Use of the solar wall. We had a building which had envelope issues. You look at the little picture on the left-hand side there, right? And that envelope needs some improvement. Well, a solar wall, cladding on the outside, which then will allow the sun to heat the air being brought into the building. You need a lot of makeup air and you need a lot of fresh air. So there's an opportunity to heat that air with a solar wall at the same time as deal with the issue of the cladding or the exterior face of the building. Synergistic opportunities. Hybrid heating systems, we talked about this one before, but basically we want to make sure that we take advantage of all of these things, and certainly in a hospital where there is quite a lot of opportunity. This isn't just about having a hybrid heating system like you might put in a house where you've got your gas furnace and your heat pump sitting on top of it basically, and taking the role first of providing the heat, and then in sort of the coldest times having the gas furnace kick in. This could be actually the heat pumps taking advantage of all that waste heat throughout the hospital, because heat pumps are really good at taking heat from outside air, but they're even better when it comes down, if I can put it that way, at taking low-grade heat, which may be wasted or are rejected right now, and bringing it back in and using it. So heat pumps are wonderful things for integrated energy systems, and hospitals, I think, or healthcare facilities have a lot of opportunity for the good application of heat pumps in this way, right? So ultimately, looking at the hybrid system as that first step towards net zero or to zero carbon, right? So not trying to get there all at once. Let's take a step into it and do it in a practical and maybe financially attractive way. So before I finish off, I want to just take a few minutes and talk about over the years how we've applied this idea of the 7 steps. We developed it back around 2000, but to me, it's the basis for a good energy audit, right? So if you're getting an energy audit done, there's actually I'm going to add to this. There's actually a guide available for Natural Resources Canada on audits, and it actually features at the core of the audit methodology this procedure, the 7 steps, which 2 phases. First 4 steps are about understanding how the building facility uses energy today. The last 3 steps are about where the opportunities with the priorities that I talked about. So I'll actually add the link, which is it's a great tool available from Natural Resources Canada. If you haven't done audits or having audits done, it's a great way to specify audits. Audits are wonderful things, but we want to make sure that we get the value for the money. One of the things I'm constantly dismayed to see is people spend good money on audits, but the audits really aren't done in an effective fashion. They may use the wrong prices. They may ignore things. They may focus on things that the auditor is good at. If you bring in somebody that's strongly oriented around lighting, they're going to focus on lighting. You need someone that has a broad energy perspective to really do a holistic energy audit. An energy audit really needs to be a holistic view of your building with all the integration taken into account. All right. An energy treasure hunt. That's something that last year I said I'm going to do lots more of these this year, and we did. And we've done a number of them in actually we're doing more of them in some long-term care facilities. I know Michelle, you've worked in some healthcare facilities, but basically an energy treasure hunt is a collaborative um, activity where we work with folks from the facility and look for opportunities. But the way the 7 steps works into that is we typically have a workshop component to this energy treasure hunt activity where we actually go through the 7 steps and we examine the way the building is using energy. We look for opportunities. So we use it as the method, but we also use it as the education within it. The treasure hunt itself is pretty basic. We examine the building from the point of view of the 7 steps. We take a walk through the facility. We sometimes do this virtually, but basically we walk through the facility. We might divide up into teams, or Michelle and I will do this, and he'll take one group, I'll take the other. We compete for who's going to find the most opportunities. We come back and we look at the building automation. We do it after the walkthrough because we want to. So we don't want to rely on the automation system to begin with. We want to, and we may come back with questions for the automation system as a result of that walkthrough. Then we flip chart ideas. We quantify as many ideas as possible, and we present those as a group. And the idea is that after it, the organization has a list of things with numbers attached to it, carbon, dollars, and can take action. Because a lot of times these treasure hunts will focus on operational opportunities, right? How to improve operational efficiency. And just to give you an example, this is one that we did recently on a long-term care home. And this is I think this is 3 months ago. And as a result of this one, we're doing 2 more. But there's a 32% reduction in carbon. And that reduction, the 32% reduction, is largely operational opportunities. This isn't about going out and spending lots of money on new equipment. It's about taking the equipment and really just tweaking it. So working through. And we also, in some of these cases, I know we've improved the indoor environmental quality with the measures that are being identified. So, what's the cost reduction? 18%. Energy is 29. Hey, look at that carbon reduction, 32%. 32%. Oh, even if you only got half of that, that's still pretty dramatic for not investing huge amount of money, maybe some time for your people, a day of time, excuse me, and the cost of doing this. And some of the incentive programs in this country, certainly in Ontario, pay for part of these types of workshops as well. Same on Energy in Ontario definitely covers some of the costs of this as a training activity. So I just wanted to contrast as we move to the finish here. Excuse me. Treasure hunts with audits with existing building commissioning. And those are 3 interventions that we can make, right? A lot of times people will start with an audit. I'd like to suggest that maybe an energy treasure hunt is a good way to start if you haven't done an audit. Even if you have done, sometimes these things can sort of bring things together. They're very collaborative, they're very engaging, they involve people. It's a great way to get your staff, as part of the fabric of your energy management initiatives. Audits, that's pretty standard, being out there for years. And EBCX is existing building commissioning. They do have they have distinctly different things. A lot of times we see people going from our treasure hunts to do an existing building commissioning, and then implementing advanced control in the building too. So, these things have a relationship. So think about all of these, and the treasure hunt itself and the audits definitely rely upon the 7 steps behind them methodologically. There is a guide available from Natural Resources Canada called the Major Retrofit Guidelines. There's a principles guide on the left here, and on the right there's one that's designed for hospitals. And these major energy retrofits are also major carbon reduction as well. But the process that they advocate, just to point out, within that guide is waste efficiency and supply. The order is important. So making sure that you're actually building that foundation. An existing building commissioning, which is really going after waste, is a foundational piece there, just to keep that in mind. So those guides are available from NRCan. One thing I'm just going to pop in here just before we finish off and head to some questions is the idea of asset management planning, asset prioritization. Within your asset management planning, is energy considered? Is carbon considered? Could you actually prioritize energy and carbon within that asset planning or management process to favor energy and favor carbon and get things done more quickly? It's a simple thing you could do, but it may pick up a lot of opportunities sooner than later. So back to the 7 steps. The 7 steps or the path to lower carbon one way or the other. I'm sure that if you go out there and look at a facility from this point of view, from the point of view of these 7 things to think about, you'll find opportunities. In fact, even without looking at the last 3 steps, I know that if you examine a facility from the point of view of the first 4 steps, you'll find opportunities. The last 3 steps gives you more ideas, but it also allows you to prioritize those opportunities. And that's the help desk for today. And we are now at 12:41. So, Autumn, I think we have some time for questions and discussions. My email address, and I truly, genuinely offer this as the help desk, right? Nobody's going to pay me to do that, but I'm more than happy to help you. Send me an email saying, "Hey, Steve, you had this idea in here. Can you explain that more? Or could I take a couple minutes and take a look at, say, Rescue Online or something I talked about?" More than happy to do that, because my mission is to change the way this country uses energy. You can help me do that. I can help you do that. Autumn?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. I think there's one question in the Q&A, but I might address Christian has raised his hand. I might allow him to talk if he wants. Christian, do you want to ask your question if you have one? Might have been an accident.
So I think David has a point here as much as a question, right? So, and maybe we can let David say a couple of words here. Can we also show the energy used for indoor air quality? It uses energy, but not monitoring the ventilation under ASHRAE 62.1 or ASHRAE 221 standard for infection control. I think what you're saying, David, is that yes, we have to use energy to provide ventilation for various reasons, but we want to make sure that we don't overdo that. David? Oh, Christian was trying to speak, but
no, thank you. She just unmuted me. Thank you so much, Stephen. It's so powerful hearing you, and we've been doing this for like 30 years. So the issue I had, and I also put it in the chat, both the building envelope and indoor air quality are 2 areas if we're going to decarbonize. And clearly, there are technologies that are economic in these areas. And some of them, as you pointed out, if you put in building automation, but you don't program it right, you actually be wasting. But I think in light of your comment about Save on Energy and now the new funding for our incentives, it's about lowering summer peak, and many of these things in terms of decarbonization need that opportunity. There are people putting secondary glass on major buildings. There are people controlling, as I was at the ASHRAE meeting last Monday, about ASHRAE audits and then decarbonization and looking at indoor air quality and ventilation, especially in light of COVID and everybody just opened up the valves and just blew, right? Even dirty filters. I bought a smart filter because I wanted to change it only at the right time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great points, David. Thank you. Yeah, it's about thinking rationally about this, and it's about eternal diligence too. I remember I worked in the industrial sector, and there was one energy manager there, and she said one of the costs of energy management is eternal diligence, and I would say so. We have to continue to focus on this. We can't just do it once and hopefully it's done. So looking at new standards, looking at new technology that's available, and continually evaluating those things. Just because something didn't work 2 years ago, it might work today. So, all right. So where are we going here?
Stephen, we might let Christian go ahead.
Yep.
Again, try again here. Okay, it looks like you're unmuted, Christian. Cannot hear you.
Oh, I can hear you very faintly, Christian.
Better?
Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, sorry for all of these. I just wonder, I have to admit it was quite a good presentation, but sometimes a little bit fast. And I wonder if you are willing to share some parts of the presentation or the presentation overall so that I can recapture. And I might have to ask my boss, Harry Vandermeer, if he can help me to understand some of the things when I've looked once at it. I'm assuming it's your property, intellectual property. That's what I'm asking.
But it's being recorded, correct? Autumn, and that's going to be distributed. So you will have the recording and you will have the ability to review that afterwards. Absolutely.
As
including the
well as well as
presentation, correct?
yeah, the slides will be sent out as well.
Yeah.
You're awesome. Thank you. Much appreciated.
And you can always send me an email if you want clarification too, and say hi to Harry for me.
Yeah.
I will. It seems like everybody knows Harry. Oh, he's a good boss.
Good. Yeah, he's actually a part of our board of directors, so we know him very well. Thank you, Christian. I think
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I let Thomas speak, because he raised his hand, we do have a question in the chat here, Stephen. Shritar asked, out of stainless cooling towers and FRP cooling towers, which are energy and cost efficient?
Well, that's a good question, which I probably am not qualified to give you the final answer on. Now, if my friend Michelle is online, which he might not be, what I'd like to do, Shadar, is to get back to you on that one. And I think you know that I will do that. I will consult with Michelle. Oh, there he is, Michelle. Do you want to weigh in on this question?
Can you repeat? I was around. I missed the question per se.
So
Yeah,
out
so
of stainless cooling towers and FRP cooling towers, which are energy and cost efficient, comparing or contrasting the two.
Energy.
And maybe neither one of us could answer it properly.
Yeah, I would say from an energy efficiency standpoint, it would be similar. I would have to go to make sure I'm not providing you the right answer. It's more about durability.
Yeah.
But in terms of efficiency, it would be equivalent. And actually, where you would gain more is really by proper control, which is often not there than the actual technology itself. But I'd say there you can get about the same amount of efficiency in terms of purely energy.
And I got to add in proper maintenance too.
Yeah.
Because water quality and cooling towers can really degrade maintenance very quickly or poor water quality. So maybe we'll investigate that one a little further, Michelle, and get back to Sridhar with an answer. Autumn, if you could grab his information and we can do that, or Sridhar, if you want to send us an email, emails on the screen there, we'd be happy to dig a little further on that one for you.
Like I said, it's on term of energy, you won't get a bigger difference. It'll be more about the life cycle cost of the whole thing rather than the energy cost.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So another question in the chat here from Rose. She said, thank you, Stephen. This was very informative. Will you check the waste management facilities within each hospital as part of your audit?
Now, Rose, are you saying in terms of the waste management, like looking at auditing the waste itself, or in terms of how waste is processed, like for example, incinerators and things like that? So if the answer to that is looking at the incinerators and those types of things, yes, that would normally be included in an audit for sure. But maybe your question relates to the management of waste beyond energy too. Processors, you said processors and compactors. Yes, it definitely would include that. Anything that uses energy for sure, or even produces energy, as in the case of an incinerator, but we have to be obviously very careful with these things too. So yes, they would definitely be included, Rose.
Okay, it looks like Thomas has raised his hand. I'm going to let him speak.
Hello.
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 How are you?
Good.
Very good chat. Stephen, Thomas Hinkie, Equilibrium in Ottawa. One of the things I just wanted to mention to those that were looking at the red screen is to be careful when you're looking at the ratio for CO2 equivalent per kilowatt, because every province has a different number. And then again, we've had controversy with this when we did audits in Ontario, because NRCan publishes a different number than the Ontario government. Ontario government, of course, is publishing a very low number, and there's 3 different kinds of CO2 emission per kilowatt. And the one that should be used is the higher one, which is for time of day. where obviously the CO2 emissions are much higher. In Ontario, we have nuclear as our base energy, obviously, but then you get the peaking happening all day long with the gas-fired plants, and they're 500 megawatt gas turbine plants. They're only 40% energy efficient. And so the actual CO2 number, because we've done cogeneration projects in Ontario hospitals, and the actual number is quite higher when you're looking at displacing kilowatts for CO2 credits. So I just want to caution that because you really have to be careful which one you use, because there's a really low one out there, which is to me not the right one to use. It's the Enercan one. I'm not sure if Red Screen is using that one or not, Stephen, but the one that
Enercan, yeah,
Enercan
they
published.
update the database from time to time, the red screen one, and you can actually set the database so you can include your own values in here.
Can you? I didn't
And
know you could. I
yeah,
didn't know you could do that with
you
red
can
screen.
dial that in, and what you're talking about predominantly is the difference between a marginal and an average factor. So the numbers that are in here are definitely average factors, and then there's different sources for average factors too. You're talking about the marginal factor, what's
But
happening on the margin.
even between red screen and Enercan, I'm seeing for average values differences. So it really depends on the source.
It does, yeah.
That
But
ratio.
if you're a user of red screen, you actually have complete control over that. You not only can, when you're doing your portfolio, your performance analysis, you can apply the factors change over time. You can have your own database, your own database of factors. When you're doing a feasibility project, you can dial your own factor in here as well,
Right.
making sure that it's appropriate to your circumstance and the context you're in. So
Right.
yeah,
So I mean, it's
very,
a very
very good point.
interesting. There's a very interesting table published by Enercan, which I'd be happy to share with you, Stephen, which shows you by province what the average is, and you can see who is the worst culprit as far as CO2 emissions per kilowatt in Canada. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you probably know, Steve, what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if I had live red screen here, I could just do this drop down, and you could pick the province, and you could see the answers. So
Yeah.
absolutely, yep.
So the ones that obviously using hydroelectricity are the lowest, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, like, actually, when you do this slide I had over here on slide 10, that's where that slide is very interesting, because if you do this for a hospital in BC versus one in Alberta versus one in Nova Scotia versus one in Quebec, like the graphs come out dramatically different, right? Even though the energy split may be the same. And this actually does speak to your strategy. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is that those splits may not be the same over time. Red Screen actually has a net zero planning tool, which allows you to acknowledge the electric or the sort of the decarbonization of the electricity grid as well. So if you want, I can share a bit of that with you in an offline conversation. But yeah, everything you said, I totally agree with you. You've got to have the right factors. You've got to consider the marginal versus the average factors, right? Depending on what you're doing, especially if you're talking the types of systems you're talking, right? And then you have to look at how that's all changing over time. So I always tell people start with this graph, because it really, it answers and asks a lot of questions.
But
Thank you for that.
it also ties into your 7 steps, because if you know going in, the macro is that, look at how much CO2 for that province you're working in for your project. Look how
Yeah.
much CO2 you're going to save for a kilowatt. And if it's a hydro-powered province like BC or Manitoba or Quebec, there's not a lot of CO2 to save. In fact, you might want to switch stuff over to electricity in those provinces.
That's how it drives your strategy. Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, David, for a little bit more on cooling towers there. So
Yeah, we can let Dave. We have 5 more minutes. So oops, I will allow David to talk again.
Sorry, I just want to bring up one thing in red screen, and Stephen, you may be that they now have archetypes for decarbonization.
yeah, they do.
The drop-down menu. So I mean, that is sort of key, where finally you can look at the ground source heat pump option as opposed to just a better air source. I just wanted to bring that up, because even if you get the marginal GHGs, which the Toronto Atmospheric Fund has, we're nuclear stations are down, so we have to burn gas. But I think the red screen has that drop down that you'll probably cover. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll cover that. But it also, red screen also has a power heating cooling model a lot of people aren't aware of, which could allow you to model a heat pump conversion relatively directly and based on outside temperatures too. So I'll probably touch on that one in the session that we do coming up on red screen.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, Red Screen is an evolving tool, and they're constantly adding good things. So we work pretty closely with them. And it's not the tool for everything. That's what I'm going to say, right? There's the right tool for the job. That's the most important thing. There's certain things I wouldn't use it for, but there is a lot of stuff I will use it for. So, Adam?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. I think we might as well close it out there for now, but like
That'll
Stephen
give you
said,
some,
yeah, give me a minute.
transition.
Next one. Like Steven said, his email's up there. Also happy for you guys to email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat if you want to reach out to me about any future events. Make sure you get the registration link for our upcoming Ret Screen one that's not quite planned yet, but it is going to be happening. And so, yeah, if you want to stay up to date on future events, give me an email. I'll add you to our email list, all that good stuff. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you so much, Stephen. I think that was really great. Went really well. And looking forward
You're
to our
welcome.
next event.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. And I love the questions. And the additional information. I'm not the only source of information. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Bye.